I'm Max Forsyth, founder and managing director at Search and Selection, the specialist in-house communications, executive search and recruitment agency covering the UK and US markets, and host of the Comms Coffee Club podcast. Really looking forward to today's episode. We have Wesley Eberle, who used to be the Chief Comms Officer at Natixis Investment Managers, which in his time there over 10 years, he took it from top 100 to a top 10 manager. And prior to that, he grew up in the US and spent his time in US politics. So yeah, it's a really meaty episode. I hope you enjoy it. And if you do, don't forget to click like and subscribe and follow our podcast, and also join our Patreon as well to get exclusive content and early access to all episodes. So Wesley, welcome to the Comms Coffee Club podcast. Great to have you.
Thanks, Max. Great to be here.
Really looking forward to this one because you've got a really interesting background and some great stories to tell. So let's get straight into it. Do you want to tell everyone sort of where you grew up?
Sure. Grew up in central Illinois, in the Midwest of the United States. Very center of the state, very center of the country. So about as middle as you can get in every aspect.
Yeah.
Ended up on the East Coast for university, started my career out there in politics and the agency world, a series of campaign gigs and things like that over the years. And then came to London about 10 years ago to come in-house with a former client into a global comms role. It was a bit of a build, a bit of a turnaround. And that had me traveling around the world on a pretty weekly basis for about 10 years.
What inspired you to move into communications after that?
Well, it really started in politics, and I think I've counseled numerous young people to follow a similar track. I think when you're starting out, the world of politics offers an incredible amount, sometimes shocking in retrospect, amount of responsibility given to very young people who have the ability to work 150 hours a week for less than minimum wage when you sort of figure it all out.
Yeah.
So it was a great start. And I started in what we call in the US, what we call field organizing, but essentially the groundworks of campaigns and working at legislative offices and that sort of thing, where it's similar to a sort of a parliamentary assistant, although in the US, even those small elected offices have massive budgets and massive teams of people on quite a large scale. So a lot of legislative work and campaign work. And long story short, with comms, I was working in campaigns, and as you do, starting to look around and think, okay, two things. One, what's applicable here, perhaps in the outside world that will help me as a young 20-something move along with my career, and also looking at kind of where the food's really made, where the action happens. And I saw both of those things on the comms side.
Post politics, you moved into public relations.
Yeah, so from there into the agency world, I was at a public affairs agency in New England, based between Boston and Washington. And in that period, worked with 100 plus clients, probably in every industry you could imagine. We were we were a bit problem solvers, which is a part of the job I loved. There was usually a win-loss column at the end of the day. We were not often an agency of record. We were at times, but more likely to be brought in on top of that. So that was a great education as well for about 8 years.
You mentioned when you moved over to Natixis, they were a former client of yours. So were they a client of that agency at the time? Were they before you moved over?
They were early in their growth story. Natixis is top 10 asset manager now globally, and manages well over $1 trillion and has for a number of years. But when I began working with him, it was more of a Franco-American partnership. Certainly didn't resemble the group it was today, a bit of a holding company, been through a number of name changes, and a new CEO had taken over, and
yes,
really had a strong vision for what this company could become. And
yes.
So I started working with him, started working with the group to help them start to think about how to apply those ideas into the market position, to the basic messaging, to their value proposition, to themselves, their shareholders, their employees, their clients, etc. So a lot of those early years were working. Every sermon needs a preacher, as we say.
Yes.
And so a lot of the work was with that CEO at the time. And when it came time to really execute globally and grow that business internationally, I was brought in and moved to London to do that. So then over my time, we expanded around Europe and Asia, Latin America, and so forth. So it was it was a great experience because there was a lot of execution on communications, but there was also a lot of what I think we all do in this industry, loosely called management and diplomacy. That are sort of lightly tasked, even though it might not be in the official job description, to do the shuttle diplomacy that's often involved in global business, right? And to be the voice of the CEO, of the rest of the executive committee, of the board, and be able to, because we often have the political and the communication skills to be dispatched to whatever issue it might be, and make sure everyone's being brought along with the kind of direction of travel that's been set out from the top. And so I had a great experience with that as well. And I think that's what we all love and relish about good comms roles is we're part of the management team. We're part of building the business. And what we do is valued as such. And I think we'd all agree that those are the types of jobs and roles we love and that we really enjoy. And because we know that our skills are being put to the best use and being put to the test, and we're being challenged, and we're delivering the value that we know we can bring. Right. If our advice is always worth more before the fact than after the fact.
Yeah, very true. Yes, if you can keep something out of the press, particularly if it's a crisis.
Worth more after the fact, because we all love the bills of crisis comms. But I think for the business, our voice is always much more valuable before the fact.
Yes, of course. And for context, I think it would be useful just to understand, if you can remember when you first started working with them, even agency side, how big were they? Can you remember, roughly what their AUM was, and some of their portfolio and their investments? Would be useful to get a feel for that sort of scale and size and what sort of structure they had in place.
Yes, of course. Well, I'd say AUM, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'd say the business roughly doubled in size. Probably more than that on the international side, but I'd say we about doubled in size over my time there. And most importantly, I think rather than just the growth in turnover and assets and so forth, was how the business really transformed. For example, when I remember in the very early days, before they became a client of mine, one of their old slogans was "the name behind the name." So there was not only was there not a coherent global message, but there was actually a tagline that said that there wasn't. So they really come a long way in terms of standing for something. And the CEO at the time, I mentioned you, who had that strong vision. It also came at a great time just following the financial crisis, where he realized, I think before a lot of other large global asset managers, that it wasn't going to be enough to that successful companies in this industry were going to have to stand for something, right? So
Yes.
the financial crisis was not, probably agree, wasn't caused by this asset management, the savings industry per se.
Yes.
That's not where the risk taking was. That's not where the poor risk management was. But it was an industry that had done very little to protect their clients from the fallout of that financial crisis. There wasn't a model in asset management of professional services like we see in other kind of direct consumer consulting, right? Whether it's legal or accounting or choose your profession.
Spread your portfolio, spread your industry, spread your risk. Yeah,
certainly. And so he had a really strong vision for what a new successful global asset management company could look like and how it could operate coming out of the crisis. And so a lot of that early work was working with the group to realize what that looked like. And I think that's what was most interesting over the time there.
You mentioned the strap line, the name behind the name.
Yes, it was 1 year before my time.
I'm trying to get my head around what that could mean.
Well, exactly. It's a affiliate with a big portfolio of brands. The idea of the name behind the names was an old strap line from many years prior. They were content to just be a whole company. But again, that goes back to, I would say, sort of the dinosaur days of asset management, when firms there wasn't a strong realization that we have to stand for more than that. This is long before the campaigns here in the UK, the changing around how financial advice is priced.
It's not just the asset management. You look at the private equity industry. The private element of it was always, really was seen as it's private equity, so therefore it's none of your business if you were outside the business. And perhaps it's the 24-hour news cycle, social media, etc. People talk. Very little is private now. So even if you have a private equity firm, difficult to keep it private, right?
I think we can look out from the 50,000 foot level. We can look out over recent years, and I think we can see industries littered with examples like that. Tech was the same way, right? This idea that we're this kind of boundless success and would just keep rolling forward, and we can do what we want. We don't have to worry about transparency. We don't have to worry about what we're doing to our customers, how we're tracking them. It's just, there's very little thought given to a lot of business decisions where comms people can be really helpful, right? This is where we bring our value. Sometimes someone needs to be at the table to say, wait a second, is that really right?
Yeah.
Is that really bringing the outside in? And I think we can look at a lot of industries recently. And again, I think tech's a great one, where seemingly if there were those voices and from a number of issues and companies, that there were dissenting voices, but they were shunned to the side, right? So they weren't given the prominence, or they didn't have representation in the boardroom or at the executive committee. And that's when companies and industries get in trouble, right? When they push those voices aside, and there's no one to ask. Sometimes just the basic the basic finger in the wind of is this really the right thing to do? Is that the right way to treat our customers?
Yeah,
we
want
completely. And
it comes from pressures from the investors, or the VC funds, or the asset managers, or the PE funds of, hey, we're expecting a decent return on our investment here, and they can often get very, it all becomes about client and customer acquisition. Spend a whole load of money on marketing campaigns, etc. Quite often communications can be an afterthought.
We don't want to come across as doomsayers, predicting something bad's going to happen, and therefore we have to do something today to prepare for it or build political capital, journalistic
Mm.
capital, whatever
Mm.
it may be. Right?
Mm.
So we don't want to come across as doomsayers, but it is quite a practicality, right? That
Yeah.
eventually something is going to come up that a company or an industry or whatever it may be is going to have to
Mm.
deal with it. And hopefully we've laid some of the groundwork and built the not just the capital with outside stakeholders, but the
Mm.
capabilities inside the group. What's
Yes.
really needed is doing the harder work of building skill sets
Mm.
inside groups,
Mm.
making sure you have the right people in place with the right
Mm.
with the right skills and knowledge and so forth. And
Yes.
that's much more important, right? Because what matters in a crisis, the people around the table and the decisions they make.
What did you do from that messaging point of view to help enable that change and transformation?
In terms of the cultural transformation, first of all, I think it starts at the top.
Yeah.
I've seen companies over the years try to sort of do a number of silly things like, let's try to figure out what our culture is by surveying people. If you don't know what your culture is, I think you got to take a step back before that and ask yourself why you don't know what your company culture is. I don't think Survey Monkey is going to sort it out for you, or try to impose culture or things like that. Culture comes from the top, right? It comes from a leader with a very clear vision.
Yes.
And they can articulate it, and then it involves having people to take that around, right? It's not giving a speech at the annual meeting or the monthly email or whatever it may be. It's there's a lot of personal interaction, and I think that's what helped us be really successful, particularly with global companies. And as we're getting back, no one's happier than I am to be getting back to the more interpersonal world, because it's all well and good to communicate information, right, via these kind of more flat screen-to-screen interactions. But
Yes.
convincing people or bringing people along, whether it be your CEO of Japan or the new person you've hired to run half of Latin America, or your head of Germany and Austria who's been there for 15, 20 years and has
Yes.
sort of been left alone and not had a European group around him, and it's been very loose. Whatever the kind of company structures, trying to knit together these global cultures. You have to show up.
Yeah.
You have to show up and be in front of people, and that's the way to bring people along, I think, number one. And number two, showing people some feedback of those results. All right, there's showing up, there's bringing people, convincing people all to move in the right direction, or organize this business together globally, or work together in a certain way. And this works across industries, I think, of course, and
Yes.
and all sizes, shapes, and sizes. And then there's when people do that, when they say, okay, we're gonna try it your way. When you start to get some of that, then it's really important to feed back to people and help them see how that's helping. Whether that's maybe it's taking a new country head or a head of a business line, and maybe you're media training them or introducing them to a more high profile role than they've had in the past,
Yes.
and making sure you really shepherd them through, help them be successful at it, so that when they agree to do it your way, say the new CEO's way, or whatever it is, they agree to change, do something a new way, that help them realize success with that. It's fed back to them immediately. That's really important too, and it just builds trust, right? I mean, so much of this is based on trust and coming to people with kind of with empty hands. I'm not here to. I'm here to help. Without that, I think you'll get a lot of people who you'll get that kind of reaction across a group of everyone saying the right thing, because they know they're supposed to say it, but not really believing it. If they don't believe it for them, or it doesn't work, or whatnot, and that's not any kind of recipe for sustainable success.
I'm interested on your point around that feedback. How have you facilitated that? What channels have you used for that? How have you done that?
I use the example of media relations and interviews and that kind of thing. I think it's a lot of, maybe feedback's the wrong word, as in terms of, I don't think it's reporting back to people. I think it's helping them be successful so that they can see they're having success with whatever this way that they're being asked to be, right? Building this culture, knitting things together, getting everybody singing from the same songbook. If they're supported and able to see that it's working for them and it's good for them.
Yes.
Let's be honest, that's what works for people, right? And I think people, not everybody's, people have their own, have their own objectives, their own ideas of what success looks like. And, there's it sounds crass to say that what's in it for me, but I think if you show people that the direction you're wanting them to move is personally successful for them, and you help them through that, then you build a lot of trust and you get a lot of long-term buy-in. And I think that's the kind of global culture you want. You mentioned CEOs and kind of the idea of walking around, and I do think that's really important. But I think even more important than that is sincerity. I've heard so many people or clients over the years say to me things like, "Well, my CEO, he or she is not. They're a bit shy, or this or that, and so this might be difficult or whatnot." And I've always said that it doesn't matter. It's just about sincerity. You can be shy as can be. You can also be gregarious, and nobody buys it. Right? I mean, the same old adage goes for politics. I mean, people are smarter than a lot of leaders think. Sincerity is it's hard to fake, and it's very transparent, and you'll see it to me. Whether you really believe in what you're saying, and if you don't, no one else is going to buy it either. No matter how available you make yourself, or there's no silver bullet, right? There's no, I don't believe in this, and I'm not really sincere about it. But hey, I'm going to have open office hours and have a company meeting where everyone can ask me questions, et cetera, because that's somehow going to fix the issue. And it's not. There is no silver bullet. You have to believe it. You have to be sincere, and then people will come along.
I think particularly what I've seen, almost sort of vicariously living a communications career through clients and candidates over the last few years. I think lots of good examples of where that's been done right. But I think, perhaps where I've seen it perhaps not being done so well is, I'd suggest that most leaders and CEOs, of course, they believe in their overarching business strategy, because they wouldn't be in the job if they didn't. But then from a communications point of view, what they can say, whether it's on a roadshow or whether it's externally to the press, it can be about something that's actually not particularly related to the business strategy at all, but it may be, something that's hot within the general communications or PR trend, whatever's getting some media traction, for example, but it might actually have absolutely nothing to do with the business or nothing to do with the business strategy. Yet leaders can get farmed out to talk about it, and it comes across as fake because they don't believe in it. And why would they?
Yeah. Or as you said, it doesn't fit with the actual business strategy on a fundamental level. I mean, the world's abound with ESG examples now, right? Because if your company's business strategy is fundamentally not environmental, social, governance focused, it's starting to become silly to then put that on the corner of your website, because
because you just look silly and you look stupid. And, actually, I think that's where a good comms counsel comes in and just goes, look, we're not about this. We shouldn't be talking about it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or say what you do and what you can do. But everybody sees through the vapid policies and empty words. And unfortunately, I think empty words and empty language is something that our industry's become a bit cursed with. And I think we ought to do better, considering we're responsible for a lot of that part of the business, to pick a lot of that up. I think there's a lot of empty language out there, and
why do you think that is?
Examples, but I think because personally, I think it's lazy. It's an easy thing to do. Jargon, because because it passes the test internally, right? We can think of an example. You come up with something, a policy, a statement, your vision, whatever it may be, and it developed internally, and everyone internally says, "Oh yeah, that looks really good." Yeah, and everyone feels like they've ticked the box simultaneously, but there's no one at the table to say, and this is what our role should be as comms people, to say, "I'm sorry, that doesn't mean anything. Those sentences don't mean anything. Those words have no meaning. It's just vapid. It's gobbledygook, and it's not going to mean anything to your customers, and they'll probably think less of you for even saying it than not saying."
See, this raises a really interesting point, actually, and there's something I've thought about a bit. Yeah, I've seen a lot of examples, don't have to name the companies at all. But yeah, a lot of examples recently where, clearly there's been a lot of, is employee activism the right phrase? I don't know. But where, I think things are being said to please certain employees over, as you say, the end client or the customer and what they're actually interested in, or what they really want from that business as their service provider. What do you think on that? Do you think external communications needs to take more precedence, in the balance between the internal and the external piece?
I think sometimes we need to take more risks. I think, and I understand the position that people in our seats feel they're often in. But I think and when I say take risks, I mean as people, as professionals. I think sometimes it's hard to be the one at the table to stand up and say that this is a bad idea when everyone else thinks it's a great idea.
Yes.
And there can be a lot of professional risk in that. I think, I'm not saying it's easy, but I think we as comms professionals should probably do more of that and could do more of that, because it's all we have. We're not accountants, we're not lawyers, and our opinion is, and our knowledge and our intuition is what we've trained and apprenticed and built experience able to do that. And when we're at first of all, the comms professional needs to be on the executive committee, on the management team at all times. That's sort of
yes.
It's often our role is to be the lone voice. And I can think of, I've done that in my career, and it's caused me to be on the outs for a little while, to be on the outs for a while with the CEO, because maybe it's a crisis situation. The CEO wants to do X, Y, or Z. And of course, the rest of the cabinet, so to speak, says, "Oh, yes, of course, that's absolutely do that." And then the comms person is the one saying, "Hey," as my mother used to say, as we used to say in the Midwest, "if it feels good, don't do it." And all of a sudden, the one seat at the table in the crisis or in the critical business discussion, whatever it may be, saying, no, this is a bad idea. And can't support it because we're not the CFO saying, hey, this is a bad idea because, look, I've run the numbers. Or the counsel saying, hey, this is a bad idea because here are the three legal exposure issues.
Yes.
Our predictions are a little more ephemeral, right? We say this is a bad idea because it could go over poorly. It could be received poorly. It could be, it could backfire, or just this is a meaningless. Or to take it back to the language question, this is meaningless, and so often the risk that we predict sometimes is further down the road. That can be a hard proposition to stand behind when the rest of the table thinks something's a great idea. But I think we need to do that more because that's our value.
Yeah, the intuition piece and the nuance piece. One is important, but two, I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I think they're probably the two reasons why I truly don't believe that communications leaders functions will get replaced by AI. And the reason I say that, I think, sometimes there can be a business decision where you have all the trend data. You have everything that's trending across Google, social media sites, whatever. It's getting picked up by industry magazines, the wider press. You can have all of those data points and all of those signals going green light, green light, green light. But there's something about your intuition that says doesn't feel right. Who's the best leader you've worked for or with in terms of their communications?
Oh, that's a great question. So honestly, so many. I wouldn't pick one. I can give you a few examples. I certainly the CEO I mentioned who brought me into those early days of Natixis to help him execute that vision he had was one of the best business leaders I've worked with.
Yes. And what was his name?
John Hyler.
John Hyler.
Back in the US now, but great business leader, great leader of people, and a great visionary. During my years in Boston, I worked for great political leaders. The late Edward Kennedy was someone I'll always be deeply honored to have worked for, and someone who really informed as well at a young age the kind of practical and pragmatic politics that I believe in still today. He was nicknamed the liberal lion of the Senate, so he was a great leader of the left, but known for what became the sort of Kennedy half a loaf philosophy.
Yes.
You take half a loaf and you move on. First, you have to win. And I avoid a big digression, but I think my party and some of the parties of the left and the right have really lost our way on that idea and forgotten that what we're really what the goal really is to help people, and first we have to win.
What's what's your most favorite campaign you've ever worked on? And this doesn't have to be political, by the way. This could be, this could be a comms campaign that you've done that just got picked up everywhere, or you spoke earlier around your global experience. Have you got an example of a campaign where it just started getting picked up in Europe, South America, North America, Asia?
For Natixis, a lot of that was the kind of core business and brand growth. We were a name that was unheard of when I began. We didn't even rank in the top 100 in Europe, and we were top 10 when I left. So
Yes.
there was a lot of, we were very aggressive. We had a lot of fun, kind of saying yes to everything. We built a global comms team. I was the first one to arrive in London, so I was able to build a team from scratch, having senior people in London, senior people in Paris, bringing people in, bringing in 15 great agency partners around the world, most of whom were with us for the 10 years I was there and still are.
Yes.
And so we had a lot of fun with brand campaigns and being able to be nimble and say yes to everything, and to say yes to any new idea. And when I think of specific campaigns, and I mentioned some of the union leaders I worked with, those were often quite fun. I'll leave out a few of the I'll leave a few of the details out, but those were quite unique campaigns sometimes, and so we had a lot of fun with those.
There was one thing you think that asset management firms should be doing differently or need to do in terms of communications. What would you say it is?
I would say if there's one thing they need to do, it's strip out the jargon, strip out it's an industry that's sometimes seems like it goes out of its way to speak in a language that its end customers don't really get. And frankly, all sounds the same. One of the things I was most surprised at, looking back at my 10 years in asset management, and prior to that, having worked across dozens of different industries, was the degree of sameness in the industry. It was shocking to me at the time, and still is 10 years later, the degree to which the players in this industry generally are all saying and doing and creating the same products at the same time and saying the same things about them, etc. Now, there's a certain market component here, and I'm sure someone in the industry would say, well, hey, we're responding to markets, responding to consumer demand, et cetera, et cetera. That's why we're all doing the same thing at once. There's an element of that. There's also an element of that in every industry. Of course, industries are responding to changing needs of customers and the environment and so forth. And I think sometimes the asset management industry thinks they're more unique than they really are. And I think you look at the industry in that broad context of business, I think it's exceptionally surprising how much sameness there is. And therefore, I think there's a lot of opportunity in the industry. Regulations are, of course, a big challenge. But with existing players, and I think we proved this at Natixis, and I think it still holds true, that even within the big firms and the big groups, there's a lot of opportunity to say something a little different, to chart your own path, and to be brave enough to go in a slightly different direction than everyone else, or do things somewhat differently, or say we operate in a different way, or our kind of market proposition or our value proposition is more fundamentally different for these reasons, X, Y, and Z. And I think there's still a lot of room for that, for big players to do that successfully and to really gain market share because of it.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. No, yeah. And I agree. I think, you're right. There's an element of course they're going to shift, generally speaking, as a group with market or industry trends. There are lots of different ways you can say things, not just in language, but also in terms of channels or content or how you get that message out there. I think the industry, really needs to change is the amount of press releases or stuff that goes out on LinkedIn, for example, is all around, their latest acquisition or their latest deal, whatever. Fine. But, what is genuinely of value to their investors and the end client and the end customer. What are their investments, helping to do? What's the value in them? Except it's that storytelling piece, bringing those investments to life, which I think, generally speaking, the industry's pretty crap at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think operating models as well have a lot. I think it's one of the things that Natixis did fundamentally well, and was a really important part of the strategy from the beginning, was the idea that we're going to sell in a different way. Instead of going to the client and saying, okay, here's what I have to sell you today, that old commoditized model, instead having a more sophisticated sales force that sits down with a client and says, let's talk about your portfolio. What do you need? Maybe I don't have it for you. I don't know. Let's chat. Let me help you. Let me give you, created a big service of loss leading free advice that we would offer to clients for free, portfolio analysis, sorts of things that not like some of the big players in the industry do that today, but the end result is a sheet recommending their own products. It's not really sincere, is it?
No.
So we had a service that was product agnostic, just was sophisticated sales advice and portfolio advice, and that was a fundamentally different way. It's not necessarily a new business model, right? The model's the same. It's a different way to sell. It's a different way to interact with your client. It creates a different value proposition, and I think there's a lot of room for things like that in the industry. And I think it's been an industry with fantastically high margins, very sticky assets. And I think there are a lot of firms that are afraid to rock the boat. When you have average margins of 30%, and you can easily ride through crises because you can just sit on your assets. As the industry did well through COVID, because you can just sit on your assets. The revenue keeps coming. The turnover stays relatively. It's a great industry. It's very, and I think people are sometimes that can often lead to a dearth of risk taking.
Maybe a little bit.
It's because you have shareholders that might not want you to. But I think long-term success depends on it in the industry, and I think there's a lot of room to do it.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. And I think anyone that sits on their kind of sits on their hands and to sort of rest on their laurels, there is, I guess kind of the great thing about any industry, there are always innovators, and there'll always be one or two disruptors who manage to push through and break the wall, if you like. So I think certainly long term, funds and asset managers do need to think hard about that. But of course, that can be a difficult, or maybe not even difficult, just do we really want to put the effort into doing it and thinking about it when we don't need to right now? Wesley, kind of thank you very much for coming on the pod. It's been great. Really enjoyed it. Is there anything you'd like to plug?
No, that's great, Max. I appreciate it. Loved taking the time. So very interesting conversation.
No worries, pleasure.
It's always nice in our industry to take out some time to talk about ourselves and our own issues instead of just our clients. So it's always a thought-provoking and rewarding discussion to talk with other people who really understand the uniqueness of the role and how it's changing. And so I love doing it. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, super. No worries. Pleasure. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming on. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.